housing prices rise rapidly so high in the region. According to the Canadian Real Estate Association, the average price of a home in Windsor is over.
Windsor's housing market just fell off a cliff. Prices down 20% in a single year, sales collapsing by nearly half, and entire neighborhoods covered in for sale signs no one's touching. Homes that sparked bidding wars in 22 are now collecting dust, while panicked sellers slash prices again and again. Behind closed doors, Ontario's premier is fuming, his temper breaking as his affordable city success story turns into the province's biggest embarrassment. If Windsor, Ontario's most stable market, can crash this hard, what does that mean for the rest of the province? The meltdown in Windsor.
Part of the reason is that the price increase is now reflecting a large demand of buyers from outside the region who can work from home and work remotely and no longer find it necessary to live in a city like Toronto.
The headlines hit like a thunderclap. Windsor, once hailed as Ontario's most affordable success story, is in freefall. Home prices have plunged nearly 20% year over year, and the whispers among analysts are turning grim. Some predict it could drop another 30% to 35% if the market doesn't find its footing by spring. What was once a booming southern Ontario market, where people from Toronto and Vancouver rushed in to buy up properties, has turned eerily quiet. The buzz is gone, replaced by silence and desperation. Walk through Windsor's once bustling neighborhoods today, and you can feel the mood shift. For sale signs clutter the streets like warning flags. Houses that would have sold in a bidding war 2 years ago are sitting untouched for months. Realtors are cutting prices, pulling listings, and calling buyers who no longer pick up the phone. Even the most optimistic agents admit this is uncharted territory. One local realtor described it as a market frozen in shock. It's not just a slowdown, it's a full-blown reality check for a city that believed it had escaped Ontario's housing chaos.
Anyone achieving 213%, so you're the Ontario champs.
Drew Dilkin says the city's housing performance last year was strong across multiple categories.
For years, Windsor was marketed as the smart investor's secret, the affordable, untapped corner of Ontario that offered both cash flow and growth. Investors came flooding in from the GTA, snapping up duplexes, student rentals, and pre-construction homes. Developers pitched it as the next big thing, and politicians proudly pointed to Windsor as proof that Ontario's economy was still strong. But that confidence has collapsed faster than anyone expected. The very city that prided itself on stability is now leading headlines for all the wrong reasons. Behind closed doors, Ontario's premier is reportedly fuming. Windsor was supposed to be his talking point, the example of how government policy, economic investment, and housing supply could coexist. Instead, it's become the province's most embarrassing reminder that even affordable markets aren't immune to the storm. In his latest press conference, his frustration was impossible to hide. When a reporter pressed him about the crash, he lashed out, blaming interest rates, foreign uncertainty, and media negativity. But those excuses don't change what's happening on the ground. People are losing money, confidence, and patience. The data tells a grim story. Sales are down nearly 50% from last year, and inventory keeps rising. Detached homes, once the pride of Windsor's real estate scene, are being discounted tens of thousands just to attract a single offer. Investors who bought at the peak in 22 are quietly panicking, forced to sell properties for less than they paid. Renters are breathing a sigh of relief, but for homeowners, this is a nightmare. The equity they thought was their safety net is evaporating with every passing month. Even real estate veterans are calling this downturn one of the harshest they've seen in decades. The mood across Windsor has shifted from excitement to survival. Coffee shop chatter isn't about new listings anymore. It's about how long this slump could last. And for the premier, whose political image is built around economic growth, Windsor's meltdown is more than a housing issue. It's a symbol of something bigger, that Ontario's so-called resilient economy might be cracking from the inside out. The once confident city that promised opportunity and stability is learning a painful truth. When the housing market turns, even the strongest fall hard. As one local investor said, shaking his head, if Windsor, the most affordable market in Ontario, is crashing, what hope does the rest of the province have? from boomtown to breakdown.
A reward for the city achieving 213% of its 2024 housing target with more than 2,300 housing starts last year.
Just a few years ago, Windsor was the underdog success story everyone couldn't stop talking about. Real estate investors from Toronto, Vancouver, and even overseas were flocking there, calling it Ontario's hidden gold mine. Prices were rising at lightning speed, with some properties jumping over 30% in a single year. People who had never even heard of Windsor suddenly wanted a piece of it. Local agents joked that homes were selling faster than they could post the listings. There were bidding wars on bungalows, lineups at open houses, and deals closing sight unseen. For a city that had always been known for its modest charm and affordability, Windsor was living through a full-blown real estate frenzy. The energy was contagious. Buyers treated homes like lottery tickets, guaranteed to appreciate, guaranteed to make them rich. Agents bragged about flipping properties overnight, while investors boasted about owning multiple units before they even visited the city. Politicians, too, joined the chorus. They paraded Windsor's success as proof that Ontario's economy was roaring ahead. Affordable housing is alive and well, one provincial official declared in 2022. Nobody wanted to hear the word bubble. The idea that prices could fall seemed almost laughable. Behind the excitement, though, cracks were forming. Prices had climbed far beyond what local incomes could support, and the market was being driven less by families and more by outside investors chasing returns. Entire neighborhoods were being bought up by people who didn't live there. The character of Windsor, once defined by steady working-class pride, was quietly changing. Everyone believed the good times would last forever, but those who'd been around long enough to remember past booms were uneasy. The growth was too fast, too dependent on hype. Then came the turn. As interest rates rose, the feeding frenzy stopped overnight. The same investors who once bragged about multiple offers started backing out of deals. Financing fell through. Pre-sale buyers realized their units were worth less than what they'd agreed to pay. For the first time in years, Windsor's red-hot market began to cool. And fast. The same agents who couldn't answer calls quickly enough were now leaving voicemails that never got returned. Listings sat untouched for weeks, then months. What had felt like unstoppable progress suddenly looked like reckless overconfidence. By 2025, the party was over. Average home prices were down 20%, and experts were warning that the worst might still be ahead. Entire developments that once promised prosperity were half empty. The coffee shops that once buzzed with talk of next big deals were filled with regret instead. Local homeowners who'd stretched themselves thin to buy at peak prices were quietly panicking as their home value sank. And, through it all, Windsor's glow faded from the Premier's talking points. What had once been his favorite example of Ontario's strength was now a cautionary tale. In the end, Windsor's rise and fall felt like a story everyone should have seen coming. It wasn't just about interest rates or policy missteps. It was about human nature. When people believe prices can only go up, they stop seeing risk. They stop listening to reason. And when the illusion finally shatters, the fall always feels sudden, even though the signs were there all along. Windsor was never immune. It just believed, like the rest of Ontario, that the dream would never end. The numbers don't lie.
This also works for renters. The average rent for a two-bedroom in Toronto is $2,700 and only goes up from there.
By early 2025, the data out of Windsor painted a picture too bleak to ignore. Home prices were down 20% year over year, and every sign pointed toward a deeper fall. Some experts predicting a 30% or even 35% decline if the trend continued into spring. The crash wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was measurable, undeniable, and spreading fast. The once booming market that locals proudly called Ontario's most stable had officially cracked. For the first time in decades, Windsor's real estate machine had run out of fuel. Across the city, for sale signs lingered like ghosts of better times. Homes that once sparked bidding wars now sat untouched. Some sellers dropped prices by $20,000, then $40,000, then even more, hoping for any interest at all. Realtors who once bragged about offers within 24 hours were now lucky to get one showing a week. Entire streets that had seen frenzied growth just 2 years earlier were quiet, optimism gone. In neighborhoods once filled with laughter and construction noise, the silence felt heavy. The numbers behind the collapse were staggering. Sales had plunged nearly 50% from the year before. Listings, meanwhile, were piling up, more than double what the market could handle. Inventory was swelling month after month, but buyers weren't biting. Condos, duplexes, and detached homes all saw steep declines, some falling faster than others. The median price of a one-bedroom condo, once around $518,000, dropped to $450,000. Detached homes that used to sell for $1.3 million were barely moving at $1.25 million. The data wasn't just bad, it was historic. Even veteran agents with decades in the business admitted they hadn't seen numbers this grim since the early 2000s. For investors, the pain was brutal. Many had purchased properties at the height of the frenzy, convinced Windsor would never slow down. Some were first-time landlords from Toronto and Vancouver, drawn by the promise of cheap entry prices and high rental yields. But as interest rates climbed and property values sank, their dreams of easy wealth turned into financial nightmares. I bought at $700,000, and now the same house is worth $550,000, one investor confessed. The rent doesn't even cover the mortgage anymore. Others simply walked away, unable or unwilling to keep up with the losses. Local homeowners weren't spared either. Families who had stretched their budgets to secure homes during the boom were now facing negative equity. Their houses were worth less than what they owed the bank. A sense of betrayal swept through the city, a feeling that they had been sold a fantasy of endless growth. Even realtors, usually the eternal optimists of the housing world, were speaking cautiously. One veteran described it bluntly: "We went from a gold rush to a ghost town in under 2 years." At Queen's Park, the Premier's frustration grew by the day. Windsor's crash was more than a local problem. It was a political disaster. This was supposed to be the model city, the proof that Ontario's housing plan was working. Instead, it had become the symbol of everything that had gone wrong. The anger wasn't just about the numbers, it was about the optics. Reporters grilled him about falling property values, investor losses, and the growing sense of panic among homeowners. His responses were sharp, defensive, and laced with frustration. Behind the calm face, insiders said he was furious. The message was clear: Windsor's market had flipped, and no amount of political spin could hide it. The numbers told their own story, one of overconfidence, inflated promises, and harsh reality. Ontario's most affordable city had become its most fragile, and the ripple effects were just beginning. The question that haunted everyone, from Queen's Park to the quiet streets of Windsor, was no longer if the market would recover, but when, and at what cost. The Premier's breaking point,
It's the latest play by some home builders to attract buyers with such deals in a slow market. In fact, 65% of them offered some sort of incentive last month, according to the National Association of Home Builders.
Meltdown reached Queen's Park like a tidal wave. Reporters packed into the media room, cameras flashing, as Ontario's Premier faced the music. His expression was tight, a mix of anger and exhaustion, as he stepped up to the podium. For weeks, headlines had blared about Windsor's collapse, the 20% price drop, the sales freefall, the flood of unsold homes. But this time, the questions were sharper, the tone more brutal. "Premier," one journalist asked, "how can you call your housing plan a success when Ontario's most affordable market is crumbling?" His jaw clenched. The cameras caught it. Something inside him snapped. He fired back with the frustration of a man watching his carefully built narrative unravel. "We've had global inflation. We've had interest rates skyrocket. These are national and international pressures, not failures of Ontario," he snapped. But his voice wavered just slightly, betraying the pressure beneath the surface. This was supposed to be the province's success story, the city that proved the system worked. Instead, Windsor had become a warning sign, every politician's nightmare, a collapse too public to ignore, too big to explain away. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered about heated meetings and sleepless nights. Advisors scrambled to calm the Premier, urging him to stay composed as the backlash grew. But patience was wearing thin. Each new data report hit harder than the last. Sales down 50%, prices sliding further, developers halting projects mid-construction. The housing minister's updates were grim, and Windsor's local officials were begging the province for help. Even longtime supporters of the Premier began to worry aloud. One party member reportedly told a colleague, "If Windsor can fall apart this fast, none of us are safe." For the people of Windsor, the spectacle in Toronto felt surreal. Their city had become the center of a political storm, a symbol of everything wrong with Ontario's fragile real estate dream. Locals watched the Premier's outburst on TV with mixed emotions. Some felt sympathy, others felt anger. He's furious because he didn't see it coming. One homeowner muttered at a downtown cafe, "We did. We've been watching this slide for months." The frustration wasn't just in the halls of power. It was on the streets, in the living rooms, in the hearts of families watching their life savings evaporate. What made the situation worse was how fast the tone had changed. Not long ago, the Premier was touring Windsor, shaking hands, praising its growth, calling it a model for affordable housing done right. He stood in front of new developments, smiling for cameras, promising prosperity. Those same projects were now sitting half empty, their investors quietly panicking. The model city had become a cautionary tale, and the Premier's words, once bold and confident, now echoed like irony. As he walked off the podium that day, ignoring shouted questions, the image was unmistakable. The confident leader who once promised to build homes faster than ever looked rattled, defeated. His fury wasn't just about politics, it was personal. Windsor's collapse had humiliated his government, shattered public trust, and exposed just how fragile Ontario's housing miracle truly was. The meltdown wasn't just Windsor's anymore. It had become Ontario's and the Premier's own. The question hanging over the province was no longer whether he could fix it, but whether he could survive it. When the investors vanished,
we've got sliding home prices, condo inventory at record highs, construction stalling, and new policies on deck that could throw fuel or fire on the entire thing, depending on who's driving the truck.
The exodus began quietly. One month, it was a few delayed closings. The next, entire blocks of new builds sat dark, unsold, and unfinished. Investors who once flooded Windsor with cash, many from Toronto and Vancouver, were gone. They had stopped answering calls, pulled out of deals, and in some cases, walked away from deposits they knew they'd never get back. The city that had once been called Ontario's affordable gold mine was suddenly radioactive. Nobody wanted in. Developers were the first to feel it. Projects that once sold out before breaking ground now couldn't fill a third of their units. Construction paused midway. Cranes left idle in the skyline like forgotten relics of optimism. Those who'd bought pre-sale condos at the height of the frenzy in 22 were learning the brutal truth. Their new homes were worth less today than when they signed the papers. Some were underwater before even getting their keys. Assignment sales flooded the market, desperate sellers offering discounts that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. But buyers weren't biting. Fear had replaced FOMO. The rental market, once a saving grace, offered little comfort. Rents held steady, but investors couldn't keep up with mortgage payments that had ballooned under higher interest rates. Many were operating at a loss, dipping into savings just to stay afloat. A few tried converting basements into rental units or slashing rates to fill vacancies, but it barely made a dent. The dream of passive income had turned into a monthly bleed, and as more landlords listed their properties to cut losses, prices sank further. Local agents described it as a domino effect. One sale below market dragged the next one down, and soon the entire neighborhood followed. Windsor's reputation as a steady, affordable investment hub was in ruins. The same influencers and real estate coaches who once hyped it as a sure bet had gone silent. A few tried to pivot, calling the crash an opportunity for savvy buyers. But nobody was buying that line anymore. Not literally, not figuratively. The city's confidence had evaporated. The Premier's fury behind closed doors only grew. His economic advisors warned him that investor pullback in Windsor wasn't just a local issue. It was spreading. Other mid-sized Ontario cities were starting to show the same signs: rising inventory, vanishing buyers, falling prices. If Windsor, the province's supposed safe zone, was collapsing, then the narrative of stability across Ontario was crumbling too. The housing market that had once propped up political promises was now threatening to bury them. Meanwhile, Windsor's residents were caught in the middle. Builders were stalling projects mid-frame, while those who had bought early felt trapped in half-finished subdivisions. Homeowners watched their property values plummet month after month, realizing that the paper wealth they'd once flaunted was gone. For many, this wasn't just a financial loss. It was emotional. The dream they'd been sold, the one they'd built their futures on, had evaporated in plain sight. By late 2025, the investors were gone, and the silence they left behind was deafening. The open houses were empty. The glossy real estate ads stopped coming. Windsor's boomtown glow had faded into something colder, something that felt like regret. And across Ontario, the same question began to echo louder than ever. If the investors have given up on Windsor, how long before the rest of the province follows? So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.